Hello, everybody. This is Anive, and I'm coming back to you with Chains and Eyeless Jack X Listener. We're starting off with Chapter 20. Come on, Jackie, just a little bite. Vomit threatened to creep up the back of his throat as a spoon was shoved into his mouth, its contents feeling like sludge as it coated his tongue. He tried to spit it out, shaking his head violently, but a strong hand suddenly grabbed his chin and tilted his head back. The sludge-like substance tickled the top of his throat, threatening to drown or choke him, and after a few seconds he reflexively swallowed before he couldn't breathe. Instantly, a chill raced down his spine as his head lurched forward and he spewed the food right back out, bile trailing down his chin as he coughed. A deep chuckle sounded next to him as he coughed, and he weakly raised his head to glare at the insane man holding him hostage. "Well, that's rather rude," he commented, sneering at the captive killer. "Throwing up the ice cream I went all of my way to make from scratch just for you." He tutted his tongue and shook his head. "Really, so impolite, Jack." Jack glared at him, sputtering one last time before baring his teeth. "I told you," he growled in a low tone, "I can't eat human food. I can only eat organs." "But have you really ever tried?" the man retorted with a grin. "Organs aren't easy to come by, you know." "Then let me go and I can hunt on my own," Jack snapped, lurching forward, but the chains enclosing his wrists pulled taut and jerked him back, keeping him from moving more than a couple feet. The man just chuckled, crouching in front of Jack just out of his reach. "Temper, temper," he said, brushing a strand of hair out of Jack's hollow eyes. Immediately he snapped his head and tried to bite him, but the man quickly pulled his hand out of the mouth's reach. "Well, now, if you're going to be like that, then I just might not bother getting you kidneys until next week." This threat made Jack tense, and he slowly lowered himself, glowering at the man silently. His stomach hurt from hunger. It had been too long since his last proper meal. I'm sorry," he muttered reluctantly, biting his lip and looking away. The man patted his head, and he winced, but he didn't try to attack. "Very good," the man said, smiling warmly. "Now open wide." Alarmed, Jack turned his head and opened his mouth to protest, only to have another spoon shoved into his mouth. His stomach lurched as a different but equally detestable substance spread over his tongue. He already wanted to vomit, and he needed food, real food. Jack groaned as his eyes opened, sitting up and lifting his mask so he could rub his eyes. He'd fallen asleep on the couch while watching a cooking show, obviously the source of the nightmare. His stomach growled a bit as he thought about the dream, and he shuffled to the fridge, selecting a jar containing the camper's liver. He didn't bother sitting down. He just unscrewed the lid and reached into the preserving fluid to withdraw it. Sniffing it absent-mindedly to check its freshness, he raised his mask and began nibbling on it. At that point, he suddenly heard a clank. Surprised, he turned his head with the liver hanging from his mouth to see Ash sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, staring at him with wide brown eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved, just staring at each other in silence. Finally, Jack slowly sunk his teeth into the chunk of liver in his mouth and bit it off, at which point Ash sprung from the table and rushed to her bedroom, slamming the door. Funny. He expected her to go to the bathroom. After all, this is probably the first time she'd seen him eating. Usually he'd try to be more careful about it. Oh well. Shrugging, Jack returned to eating, taking a seat at the table opposite the half-eaten bowl of cereal. After they had arranged the food, Ash started coming into the kitchen more and would make her own meals. Though she still asked him to get anything she needed from the fridge, for the time being they ditched the chain, and since Jack didn't have much reason to leave the cabin, sudden movements tended to exacerbate the pain in his head where she'd hit him with a rock, rendering hunting rather inadvisable. Again, he didn't hold it against her, though. However, whether the chain-free arrangement would persist after he recovered remained to be seen. He still didn't fully trust her, but at least they were getting more comfortable in each other's presences. Jack's gaze wandered to the laptop, and after licking the juice off his fingers, he opened it and logged into her account. After a day of fiddling with it, he determined that accessing the internet was impossible due to a lack of Wi-Fi hotspots near the cabin. However, there was still plenty to do with it. Ash had downloaded a lot of pictures and stories over the years, and he enjoyed browsing through them in his free time. As he scrolled through one of her folders, he paused upon seeing a fan-made movie poster for some movie about a female superhero. An idea struck him, and he closed the laptop, unplugging it and carrying it to her room. He knocked on the door and waited for her to call. "It's open," before pushing the door open and stepping inside. She was sitting in her bed, reading a book. Once he entered, she glanced up in surprise, her eyes widening as she saw the laptop. Reader's POV. Seeing someone eating human organs does a number on your appetite. Thanks to seeing the photos a couple days ago, it wasn't as traumatizing and vomit-inducing as it could have been, but I still didn't really feel like watching him finish. I returned to my room and I tried to read a book to push it out of my mind, but was surprised when I heard a Jack knock a few moments later. Weird, lately he's been giving me a lot of space. It's open, I called. However, when I looked up to see the laptop in his arms, my heart sank. Crap, he knows I used it. Every worst case scenario ran through my mind at once as I imagined what kind of punishment he'd give me for using it, probably assuming I'd try to use it to call for help. My neck began to throb at the mere thoughts that ran through my head when, you can watch movies on this, right? It took a second for his question to register. So he wasn't here to punish me for using it? It looks like he didn't know about it. As I processed the fact that I wouldn't be killed, Jack got a bit impatient and asked, "Can you play DVDs on it?" Yeah, I mumbled, nodding quickly. DVDs and Blu-rays. Alright, I'll pick up some DVDs next time I go out. With that, he turned to leave. Actually, I have a couple movies downloaded on there. Jack froze, turning to look back at me. After a few seconds, he crossed the room and sat on the mattress beside me, placing the laptop in front of me. I looked at him in surprise, a bit taken back by his sudden proximity. Can you pull one up? Was this really happening? I reached for my laptop gingerly, carefully lifting the screen. Soft light emanated from the screen, showing my desktop background in all its glory. It had been so long since I last seen it, so long since I last touched it. Smiling, I opened up the list of movies I downloaded and scrolled through it. Action, not in the mood. Horror was definitely a no, and the cursor hovered over an animated one. Howl's Moving Castle, and I cast a curious glance at Jack. He didn't seem to offer any objection, so I clicked it and pulled it up. Bliss filled me as the movie began. It had been so long since I last seen this one. It was absolutely beautiful. Silly as it sounds, it almost made me want to cry. Seeing it again was wonderful, just what I needed. I indulged myself in the silly animated world, laughing at every joke, even the ones that weren't funny. Jack didn't laugh with me, but he stayed and watched anyway. Once the film eventually ended, I immediately went to start with another one, pausing to cast an inquisitive glance at Jack. He shrugged, which I took as an okay, and began scrolling through the list. Let's see. I had a bunch of classic Disney movies, and I scrolled through the list before pausing on a classic, Beauty and the Beast. I hadn't seen that one in a while. Fond memories of singing along to the songs prompted a smile to flash across my face as I pressed play. Nostalgia flooded me as the old Disney logo appeared, and as the movie began, I cast a glance at Jack. I couldn't see his face with his mask on, but I eagerly glanced at him throughout the movie anyway to see if I could notice any reaction. Beauty and the Beast is a classic, and a beautiful, introverted girl offers herself as prisoner to a monster in the place of her father, thus beginning an unlikely romance. Actually, it kind of reminded me of my own situation, aside from the romance part. As the movie proceeded, I became more immersed in the plot, almost forgetting about Jack's presence. Eventually, Belle showed up at the Beast's castle and offered to take her father's place, and it was at that point I heard a small gasp next to me and I snapped my head to look back at Jack in surprise. He was hunched forward, his body trembling violently. Convulsions shook his chest, and he had his arms wrapped around himself as if to keep warm. Sweat clung to his bare arms, and glinting in the dim light from the laptop, his breath was ragged, little more than a series of small gasps for air. Seeing this, I quickly paused the movie and looked at him. "Jack?" I whispered, reaching for him. However, before I could touch him, he sprung off the bed and darted out of the room, nearly falling in the process from obvious dizziness. For a moment, I didn't move, just sitting there in shock. Then I quickly grabbed the psychology book from the nightstand and flipped to the page I'd left off, skimming a list of symptoms: shortness of breath, dizziness, sense of terrors, chills. All symptoms pointed to a panic attack, and it hadn't been random either. It had been triggered by seeing the dungeon scene. I groaned softly as I closed the book and put it back, mentally cursing myself for my stupidity. Once again, I'd awakened deep-seated emotional trauma. Feelings are a funny thing. On the one hand, I felt bad and wanted to go after Jack to try to comfort him. On the other, I still had really mixed feelings about him, and I felt like we'd grown a little closer over the past couple of days, but not too close. Frankly, Jack still terrified me. Besides, I had no idea how to comfort him if he really did have PTSD like I thought. I'd never met anyone with it before, and the textbook didn't say much about how to properly deal with it. After some serious grappling, I logged out of my account and switched to Buddies. Chapter 21. Jack's POV. Fear, panic, terror, despair, hopelessness. Every awful emotion from his captivity flooded Jack as he sat hunched high in the tree, face buried in his arms as he hugged his knees. His mind was blank yet racing at the same time. A shudder ran down his spine as he recalled the last movie he watched with Ash, the one about the monster and the girl it held prisoner. That scene in the dungeon had brought back so many memories, all bad. Inhaling sharply, Jack hugged his knees more tightly and squeezed his eyes shut. It was over. He didn't have to worry about it anymore. But he was dead. Dead, dead, dead. There was no way that man was still alive. Jack knew because he'd cleaned the corpse of every internal organ, yet still he worried, still he panicked. Still those memories haunted him whenever he closed his eyes, making it hard to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Don't think about it, don't think about it, he told himself, gritting his teeth. Stop thinking about it. And yet he couldn't. All he could see whenever he closed his eyes was that cruel smile full of sadistic glee. Reader's POV. I don't know why I logged onto Buddy's account again. After all, last time had ended with me vomiting, but today I felt like I had to. I'd given Jack another panic attack, and I felt like the first step for me to help was to know exactly what happened to him. Of course, I still had no idea why I wanted to help him so much, though I had nothing to do with that, with what Buddy did to him, and the guys tried to kill me multiple times, but that didn't stop me before. I picked up at the first photo after Jack was fed the kidney. Blood covered his mouth and strings of flesh clung to his teeth, visible as he bore his teeth at the camera in a scowl. A few photos later, his mask was finally placed back on his face for the first time since the whole ordeal began. His shoulders were visibly slumped at that point. Whether that was from exhaustion or relief wasn't clear. After the whole feeding ordeal, Buddy gave him a break for the rest of the week, and there was barely any photos. Skip to the middle of week 3, there was a rapid-fire set of Buddy injecting Jack with some mysterious liquid. Due to his restraints, Jack couldn't avoid the needle and quickly fell unconscious. And the next shot showed him awake with a piece of tape over his mouth, safe from being bitten. Buddy began taking close-ups of Jack's eyes, or lack of them. There had to be dozens of these photos, Jack squinting as Buddy shined a flashlight into his sockets to showcase their emptiness, and one Buddy actually stuck his fingers into one to lift the eyelids, while the other eye was squeezed shut and his expression was visibly scrunched with pain. Looking at the photos of his eyes felt so wrong, and after a couple more I just skipped the remaining thumbnails until I finally saw the familiar navy blue of Jack's mask. After that, most of the photos were just rapid-fire successions of Jack eating, most of which I skipped. Every now and then Buddy would feed him things other than the organs, always ending in Jack vomiting. Disgust filled me at each one, and I scrolled past them only to stop as I noticed a different thumbnail mixed in with the rest. Peachy skin filled the thumbnail, contrasting sharply against the rest of the relatively dark-colored photos. Curiosity piqued, and I clicked it and enlarged, revealing it to be a photo of Buddy's hand. Several sharp puncture marks lined the side of his palm, and as I stared I realized that it was a bite. At some point he'd slipped up and given Jack a chance to bite him. A strange sense of satisfaction filled me at the sight after seeing so many horrific images. Buddy had tormented him so much, and it felt good to know Jack managed to get back at him. However, as soon as I saw the next few photos, my good feelings faded. This act would not go unpunished, though. The next photo showed Jack in a much worse position than before. His mask was discarded, his eyes wrapped in a blindfold, and duct tape around his mouth. Bulky headphones covered his ears, and as I noticed some weird strip on his nose, I realized what Buddy had done. He'd cut off all of Jack's senses. Horrified, I felt numb and absently clicked the arrow key without thinking, bringing up the next photo. Jack was still bound, but he wasn't alone. Buddy was next to him. A giant smile was plastered on Buddy's face as he faced the camera, crouching next to Jack. He had a hand on Jack's head, ruffling his hair, while Jack seemed to recoil from his touch. I swear I could see more of his tears streaming from under his blindfold, his posture showcasing the raw fear he felt from Buddy's touch. However, what held my attention was Buddy's smile. A shudder ran down my spine as I stared at it. His face contorted into the most twisted, sickly, sweet smile I'd ever seen. Malevolent glee filled his eyes, sadistic and cold with a childlike excitement that sent chills through me. Never had I seen such an evil smile, not even when Jack tormented me for fun. The man in this photo wasn't the Buddy I knew, the one I remembered. His face was the same, and so were the clothes, but everything else was just wrong. My Buddy was warm and loving, a kind father figure who cared about me, but this Buddy, this one was wrong. Everything about him was wrong. Cruel, evil, malevolent, sadistic, awful, monstrous. This wasn't my Buddy. This was someone else, a monster in human skin. And the question was, which was the real one? And with that thought, I pressed the space bar and the photo vanished, returning the screen to the file of thumbnails. The next thumbnail was for a video, and I was not in the mood to see that or any more photos. I had enough for one day. I exited the window and I logged out, slamming the laptop shut. I didn't care if I slammed it too hard. I just wanted to stop thinking about that. Flopping onto my back, I closed my eyes and sighed, pushing the photos out of my mind as best as I could. Eventually, I sat up and looked around, only to freeze as my gaze fell upon the dresser. Sitting atop it was the framed photo I grabbed when I was packing, showing Buddy's smiling reflection in the mirror behind me as I blew out candles. Staring at it, something inside me snapped. Rage suddenly overcame me, and the next thing I knew, I was standing over the toilet, my hands shaking with anger as I held the photo above the bowl. Shoulders heaving with a silent fury, I let out an angry yell and tore it in half, ripping each half furiously and violently. Shreds of paper fell into the bowl, each one sending a small ripple as it landed in the water. Questions swirled in my mind the whole time, only making me feel angrier. Why did Buddy look so happy in the photos? When did he plan to keep Jack as a pet? What did Buddy plan to do with him, and which Buddy was the real one? How much of my life was a lie? I had to blank my mind in order to stop, and at that point my knees gave out and I fell panting heavily. Staring at the shreds of paper floating in the water, I reached out and flushed the toilet, watching them swirl around as they were pulled into the drain. Once they vanished from my sight, my rage finally wore off, numbness filled me, and only then did I finally notice that tears were rolling down my cheeks. That was the last of those two chapters. The chapter after this one is going to be chapter 22. We are 22 out of 50 chapters. Holy, that is crazy. We have gotten through that a little bit, haven't we? Oh, okay. I am so sorry I'm posting this a little later than the last one. I ate some soup and had to drive gifts over to some friends' houses. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!